Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr.D.Z.Cofield. The show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z.Cofield.
Welcome to another edition of Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. D.Z.Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz, The Choice, 90.9, KTSU and KTSUradio.com, and on the Real World, Real Talk podcast network. I want to thank you for joining me on this special day, Valentine's Day. It's a day set aside for lovers and for those who dream of loving. And today I've got a really, really interesting show because we're going to talk about the importance of loving yourself in order to make sure that you have the ability to receive love from others and give love to others. We see in our society today a generation of people who don't think a lot about marriage. Not that they don't want to be married, but they just don't want to go through what they have seen their parents go through, and that's divorce. And so the question on the table is, how do we make sure that we have healthy relationships? How do we make sure that those who are looking for love are really equipped to identify it and find it? And I'm excited to have our two guests with us on today. Now, just a couple of housekeeping matters. Before we go any further, let me say first, if you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Instagram, on IG at DZ.Cofield. You can follow me on Twitter at DZ.Cofield, and you can follow me on Facebook at DZ.Cofield. I don't know if you've been watching what's been going on in the news, but man, this impeachment trial to me is absolutely insane. As you see the evidence that's being presented by the House managers, and you see Republican senators who can't think beyond partisan politics, who are still proclaiming that they are not going to vote to convict President Trump of treason and what he's been charged with, inciting a riot. I think what's interesting to me is this is really a microcosm of what we see in our society, that we stand for what's right when it's convenient. And when we deem it to not be convenient, we're not going to stand for what's right. As a matter of fact, we're going to embrace what's wrong. There is no way, no how anybody should be able to say what was said and what was done by former President Trump, that it's okay. But to have the unmitigated gall to not only argue that it's okay, but then to go forward and to somehow justify it and say, well, that's not really what he meant. And the House managers are doing a tremendous job of linking what he said, what people heard, and what they did. And then what he said right afterwards, which to me speaks more to his intent than anything else. So it's going to be interesting to see how things move forward. We're watching President Biden and the COVID relief team continue their work to help get a handle on COVID-19. And I will tell you this, I think this is a disaster. I think this is as much a disaster, if not more, than what we went through years ago with Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Harvey. It's a different kind of disaster, but it's a disaster nevertheless. And here's what I have seen over the years, and you can let me know if you agree with me or not. When a disaster comes, we don't choose either or in terms of how do we get relief to our residents. It's both and. We don't just say we're going to do a mass site to offer relief to people, because we know there are a lot of people who cannot get to those mass sites, who don't have cars, who don't have access to those mass sites. We know based on what's going on, the digital divide has been amplified. So for people who have to go online and register, and we're hearing stories of people who are registering and spending the better part of 3 weeks, 4 weeks trying to register to get a vaccine. If you don't have a computer, because we're assuming that they have a computer, and if you don't have reliable internet, then you're not going to be able to register online. And then we're hearing from people who are saying, hey, there are 5, 6 different sites that you need to register on to try to get one vaccine, because there is no central site for you to get registered on. So you can be registered on one, not registered on 4 or 5 other ones. People are getting vaccines on those 4 or 5 other sites. And we're hearing stories of medical professionals who are not able to get this vaccine. And so I think we are really forced to now rethink logistically, how do we get this out to people? And I suggest to our political leaders that we follow the model of the food bank, and we follow the model of FEMA. We follow the models that we use during disaster recovery. The city of Houston, literally takes their resources and spreads them out in the community to make sure people have access to it. And what's different about this is, people who would, be questioned as to whether or not, for example, there are some people who say, well, they're going to more than one site to get relief. It's like they're going to get a box of groceries. Okay, if they get 2 boxes of groceries, in my opinion, what difference does it make? But you're not going to do that in this setting, because all you can get is one vaccine, right? So you can't get 2 or 3 vaccines. You can't stockpile vaccines. So how do we make sure that people get the one vaccine that they need and then can come back and get the second vaccine? And I think as we decentralize the availability so that we have smaller sites and larger sites, we can make the vaccine more accessible. Just my 2 cents. All right. So today we're going to talk, it's Valentine's Day night, and we're going to talk about relationships. Now, really, this is a conversation. So let me be really forthcoming. This conversation really was held in my production meeting. And one of the people who was in the production meeting, as we were talking about relationships, and we were talking about this generation's unwillingness to get married, the fear of getting the divorce. Some who have been through it don't want to go through it again. And we began talking about relationships and our perceptions of ourselves and our perceptions of one another. We started talking about love languages and this mystical idea of what it means to have vibe and flow with somebody. There's that relationship out there that where people they just seem like they have flow, right? And what are the things that need to happen in order to have that kind of relationship, to have that kind of bond? And if you've been in a bad relationship, man, how important it is to have a good relationship. But we have a generation of people now who are saying at a very young age, you know what? I'll take no relationship over a bad relationship. And so I'm really excited to have my guest with me on today. Minister Chris Johnson is the co-host of Impact Houston Live, and he is on every Saturday morning on KTSU with the lovely Donna Franklin with news and public affairs. And I appreciate Chris and his preparation and information that he shares on that show. And Miss LaTwanice Walker, Lala, as we love to call her, she has been a guest in the past with Real World, Real Talk, as we've talked about millennials. And I know millennialism now is like, I don't know if it's a bad word or what, but millennials and what are some of the things that millennials are dealing with. And as we had this conversation, it was like, wow, we got to see if we can capture this and put this on the air. So I'm excited to have them both with me on today. Let me welcome to Real World, Real Talk, Minister Chris Johnson and my sister. She's really more like my daughter. I don't even want to call her my sister. That's LaTwanice Walker. How are you all doing today on Real World, Real Talk?
Doing amazing. Thanks for having me. Doing well, Dr. Cofield. Thank you for having us on.
So we had this conversation, and I thought it was just a powerful conversation. And to our listening audience, it was really a very organic conversation as we talked about some of the apprehensions and fears that we have around relationships. And one of the things that came out of it was, you know, how do you celebrate Valentine's Day when you don't have this Cupid kind of love in your life, right? And then some were saying, hey, you know what? I'm cool with not having that kind of love because I'd rather not have it than to have something bad, right? So let's talk about relationships from your perspective. Both of you have had relationships to varying degrees. And I think how this started, if I'm correct, and if I'm not, one of you correct me, we were talking about marriage, and I was telling the story of a couple. They had been married 50 years. Mm-hmm. And the 51st year that they were married, right after they had this big family celebration, the lady filed for divorce. And her children were like, okay, wait a minute, what's wrong? Like, why is mama, like, why is she tripping? And so they, you know, confronted their mother, and they was like, mama, why are you filing for divorce? Like, y'all been married 50 years. Why are you filing for divorce now, your 51st wedding anniversary? And she said, I've been miserable for 50 years, and I refuse to die married to this man miserable. And we were talking about how many people are unfulfilled in their marital relationships. And so there are people who are now saying, you know what, man, we're not even going to get married because we don't want to go through the divorce. We don't want to go through the hassle. So let's talk about how you all perceive this object of love. I'll talk a little bit about the 5 love languages later on, but I just want to talk about this idea of love and having self-awareness and self-knowledge, because LaTwanice, one of the things that you said that struck me was this journey to self-discovery and emotional health that you find yourself on. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, so it's called emotional intelligence, right? It's a journey that you have to go on when you have to face the music of your decisions and what those consequences may be. If you commit yourself to someone, what does that look like for you in the long run? And are you guys compatible enough to make a commitment, a committed relationship? So yeah, emotional intelligence is very, very key. It's one of the main things that you can have when going into relationships.
Yeah.
Relationship, honestly.
Yeah. You know, I just did a review of a book that's being published on marital relationships. And one of the things I appreciated about the book is that it made it very clear that being Christian or 2 Christians getting married is not enough to guarantee that you're going to have marital success. That you have to put some work in. There's still some areas where you have to grow and communicate and compromise and all of those things in order to really have a healthy relationship that can blossom into a healthy and fulfilling marital relationship. Chris, as you think about it from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that people are dealing with and facing when you talk to people around relationships? And I know you talk to brothers who are struggling, and we're in this time of really changing the interactions of men and women. It's just it's a really, really, I think, chaotic time for a lot of people.
No, absolutely, Dr. Cofield. And just to echo what you said, you know, when I'm, you know, conversing with, you know, brothers, friends, just men, one of the reoccurring statements that come up privately is that men are hurting. Men are hurting for a multiplicity of reasons, some from failed relationships. Other men have expressed just regret in terms of, you know, they're finally coming into an awareness that they have lacked, as my sister LaTwanice said, that emotional intelligence. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have brothers who may have that emotional intelligence, but that doesn't necessarily lead to an emotional connection. And so some brothers fear relationships. You know, they have that gamophobia, that fear of relationships. not because they don't want intimacy, but how do I initiate intimacy? What does that look like for a man or a Black man in 2021? One of the things that both men and women are having to deal with is understanding the changing landscape of dating today. The rules of dating have changed. What was permissible just as short as 5 or 10 years ago may not be permissible now. And so, how do I court a woman? How do I approach her? What are the right things to say? What should be our philosophy on dating? Do we need to go Dutch? And so a lot of brothers are really looking for tools to really strengthen their approach to the selection process in terms of marriage and longer lasting relationships.
Yeah, I know. I always say brothers are not that smart. I mean, we're really not. And let me add, we're not that complicated. I think a lot of times women read their complexity onto men when we're really not that smart. I mean, we're really not that difficult. It's like if we can just have a remote control and something to eat and and some sex, I mean, brothers are pretty much settled. I mean, it's like,
right,
man, and if you respect me and really honor me as your man, that's like, I'm like, if I'm not there 100%, I'm there 99% of the way. And a lot of times there's the assumptions made that people will know what the other person needs, because if you say you love me, then you should somehow be a mind reader. Somehow you should.
Right.
LaTwanice, I want to talk about this issue of emotional health, emotional intelligence. And I love the idea of the journey of self-discovery, of really finding out who you are, what you need, so that you can articulate it. Like if somebody said to you, hey, what do you want? What do you like? Don't castigate me because I'm asking the question, answer the question. Help me, love you the way that you really want to be loved, so that I can be the man that you need me to be, and vice versa. Tell me about that journey for yourself personally and those that you interact with.
Yeah. So, emotional intelligence doesn't happen by chance. It's definitely something that I had to learn over the years. When I was getting into relationships, just getting my feet wet in the water with it, it was interesting because I didn't know what I wanted. I just know I wanted a boyfriend. I just knew I want to be married. I want to have kids, and I want a house, and I want this, I want that. I just knew long-term goals, but I didn't know how to get there and how to maintain that bond or that friendship that I would eventually have into a committed relationship. So with that, I had to go through certain experiences with breaking up with people, or them breaking up with me because I didn't know what I wanted, being cheated on. It's a plethora of experience that I've had, and I'm only 27 years old. So there's a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that comes along with that. And this is self-discovery, because every single day you have to learn something new about yourself, because if you don't love yourself, you won't be able to love no one else. It's best for you to get to know yourself while you're single, instead of trying to get to know yourself while you're in a relationship and you have to care about someone else. And you have to care about their feelings and, how you are supposed to approach them about certain situations or conflict resolution. Are you communicating effectively and efficiently? Can you overcome challenges by yourself before you can overcome a challenge with someone else that you said that is your intimate partner? And how do you diffuse conflict? How is that going to work? Are you going to argue it out? Are you going to isolate yourself? Or are you just going to go with the flow? Like, you know what? If he don't say nothing, I'm not going to say nothing. And now we're sweeping things under the rug and just trying to go with the flow. And that doesn't work, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to come back to haunt you. So it's definitely been in a journey.
We talked a little bit about, and you mentioned that Cinderella syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That,
Yeah,
that
that thing is real. It is real. I had to relearn and rethink some of the ways that I was viewing love. I was like, I'm gonna find a husband. I'm gonna have it's called the white knight syndrome.
yeah.
You're expecting, this false reality of this fantasy. Basically, you're expecting this fantasy out of everyone you meet, everyone that you're trying to be in an intimate romantic relationship with. He is the one, she is the one, this is my soulmate, right? And in some ways that can be a little bit self-centered because you're not allowing yourself to be open to learning from someone else who may not be there with you. Like, I'm just trying to get to know you. You up here, I need you to come down here.
Yeah. Minister Chris Johnson, talk a little bit about your journey to emotional intelligence and just things that you've learned over the years. Unlike LaTwanice, you were married. You're not married now. But talk about that journey and how you've grown in your emotional intelligence.
Sure, absolutely. Before I got married over 10 years ago, I was speaking with my grandmother, and she said, baby, I want to tell you something. She said, a man marries a woman expecting that she will never change. A woman marries a man expecting that he will change. And so as I think back on my time, when I was married, there was a change that I think my ex-wife and the majority of women want to see in their husbands over the years of maturation, of development, an increase in conflict resolution skills. And I think a lot of times, we make the fallacy of believing that chronological age should necessitate that type of maturity, when in all actuality, people have to be taught those skills or model those skills for them. And so from my perspective, I've focused on, as LaTwanice said, that self-awareness, but also self-regulation, how I respond to internal triggers, my communication, what are your expectations, right? So asking that person, what are your expectations? And then also simultaneously, while I'm listening to their expectations, saying, okay, well, here are my expectations, or here's where I'm at on the spectrum. I've learned that it's not about me trying to find the right woman. It's actually about me being the right man.
Yeah. So that idea of becoming the right man is and becoming the right woman, right? I always tell people, they love to quote the scripture, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And yes. But women have to work on being a wife worth finding, and brothers got to work on, being a brother worth keeping,
right.
How has that idea of personal growth challenged you now as you look at relationships? Both of you are attractive, intelligent people, and as people approach you, come to you, let them know they're interested in you. How is your journey to becoming more emotionally intelligent? How has that manifested itself now as you interact with people just from the start? LaTwanice?
So over the years, I have let a lot of stuff slide because I didn't know exactly what I wanted. And I know men, majority of the time, say, you women, y'all don't know what y'all want. Sometimes we really don't. But with that self-discovery, that journey that you're going on, self-awareness, being aware of other people's emotions as well, that's a part of that emotional intelligence that is key to you becoming the best version of yourself, so that you can unlock the best version of yourself, but also who you attract. One of the things that helped me kind of center myself was, okay, who am I attracting? Do I like this? Do I like the type of men that I'm attracting? No. Okay, so what do I need to do? This is a it's a constant reflection of am I where I want to be? Am I who I want to become? And then on the Christian view of that, am I all that God needs me to be in order to advance his kingdom, but also get the desires of my heart as well? So it's like a nice, healthy balance of trying to figure out what does that look like for us. So it's interesting at this point. So.
Okay, so I want to ask both of you, because LaTwanice, you just opened up a door for me in terms of in terms of what you attract. I mean, because I often tell people, you're going to attract who you are. And what's interesting is as you live your life, I've had this happen to me, whereas I can look back and see where I was in my life in terms of a maturity, in terms of an emotionally intelligent, emotionally healthy or not healthy person. And look back and go, whoa, like, man, you can meet a person 20 years later and go, like, was I really like really? Like, okay. And that says more about me where I was as opposed to that person, because that person hasn't changed. So you talk about attracting real and attracting better. Chris, do you see your perspective changing as you have engaged on and been on this journey of emotional intelligence and becoming more emotionally healthy?
Absolutely. I have definitely noticed some incremental changes in terms of my approach to dating and my approach just to having conversations around relationships in general. So case in point, one of the things that I think we as African-American men have to really work on is more fluid communication. And so, there was a time where, let's take conflict resolution, for example. I may do something that would upset, a person that I may have been dating or with, or they may have done something to upset me. And versus me internalizing it and being passive aggressive, it's important for me to raise my hand and say, hey, baby, this right here really made me feel this kind of way. Or when you said this, it made me feel this kind of way. And not just it made me feel this kind of way. Here's why it made me feel this way. The inflection in your voice, your tone. I've learned from a friend of mine to not just not just look at the what, but look at the why. And so I'm learning how to step back, as I get older as a man and look at the why and really recognize when people may not have the capacity or may not have the tools that I need in a relationship, or more realistically, when I may not have the tools that a person may need in a relationship, right? Doesn't make me bad or good or make them good or bad. It's just, hey, I may not be able to provide this person specifically what they need. And to be mature enough to say, because I cannot provide you what you need, then, hey, we need to just remain friends and go our separate ways.
So let me ask you both, because I think you raised something interesting, and there's a span of years between each of us. So I'd be interested to hear from you where you are right now. When do you feel that you get to a place that you're ready to, in a healthy way, engage in a relationship? When do you think you're ready? And I guess we can put a chronological time on it, but I know it's not time related, because I know some people who are in their 50s who still aren't ready for a relationship, and they're too selfish and a whole lot of other things. But where do you feel like you need to be in order? So maybe that's the better question, not age, but what are some characteristics? What are some traits that you think you need to have in order to be ready to enter into a relationship?
I would say, look how you are responding to your friends, right? I think that's a great tester before you know that you're ready for a relationship. But honestly, you really don't know when you're ready for a relationship because it's all about if something comes up, let's say a certain situation comes up and you don't respond in the way that you thought you should. Like, I think it's so important that you have that constant reflection because you won't know how to go about it when it comes to your friends, for example, right? With my friends, if I notice that they said something that I didn't like, I have grown to speaking up about it. I was a sheltered child. I was taught stay in a child's place. You only speak unless you're spoken to. So I've grown out of that habit of just, isolating myself and just being quiet and just making sure like, hey, I didn't like that. Or, hey, you know what? I'm actually not emotionally ready to speak on this yet, but give me a couple of moments because I need to get my words together. I need to get my thoughts together before I can speak on this. I didn't like the way that you said this. This came across this way. Did you mean for your tone, your delivery to come across this way? Is this what you meant? I know you're my friend, so I'm going to give you, the benefit of the doubt before I make assumptions about how I wanted to take that. So I would say a good tester is how are you responding to your friends? How are you guys resolving conflict in that way? Being mature, it does not happen overnight. Just the way you said earlier, Pastor, about, you didn't like the same type of woman that you like now, or you weren't attracted to the same type of woman that you are now because your taste has changed. Your maturity level has risen. Like it's a constant. I keep thinking of the word evolution. You're evolving, constantly evolving, becoming. So being very mature definitely does help, though.
Yeah.
So you can recognize that.
It's funny. I have female friends who say, I the problem with men, y'all just like crazy. Y'all just like crazy. The crazier they are, the more you like them. And it's like, no, I don't think anybody's like intentionally looking for crazy. But I will say this, when you're not at a place of emotional health, it's hard for you to identify what is unhealthy.
Yeah.
What unhealthy is your norm.
Right.
If that's how you interact, as dysfunctional as it may be, you become codependent and you become, accustomed to dealing with whatever that dysfunction is. And that's why there's some of you who are listening right now, you have gone through a series of relationships. The name has changed, but you've been in relationships with the same person over and over again.
Yep.
And you'll keep on talking about changing the kind of person you date, when in actuality, I think going back to your point, Chris, you got to change the kind of person you are. And so if you get nothing else out of tonight's show, I hope that you hear me saying and hearing our guest saying, the only person you can control is you. And the only person that you could really change and put on the path of health is you. You cannot change anybody else. You can inspire them, but you can't change them. They have to make that decision for themselves. I want to talk just for a moment about the 5 love languages and having that kind of at least frame of reference to begin to talk about how I receive love and how I give love. I think a lot of times people, and sometimes those are not the same. Sometimes we give love in a way that's different than how we receive love. And sometimes it can be the same way. And I'm a firm believer that the flow and the vibrancy and the vibe that people are looking for, sometimes people may say, oh man, we just flow together. We just got this crazy chemistry. That really chemistry, when it's stumbled upon, is really just a coalescing of our love languages. So in other words, if you like receiving gifts and I show love by giving gifts, then we got this crazy flow. you know, and if I need words of affirmation and you give me words of affirmation, then whoo, man, we got this crazy vibe, man. And it was, man, I ain't never had this flow before, you know. And what we really need to understand is if we can identify how we love, we can have that conversation up front. I mean, we can literally talk, because people tend to go to where they naturally flow.
Absolutely.
Right? If I just love, you know, there are people, for example, that I know who love buying cards, and they can spend hours in a supermarket or drugstore picking out cards, and they pick out great cards, right? They're like professional card buyers and card givers. Yeah. And there are other people who are not card givers. You know, I mean, they'll talk to you, but they just keep it moving. And for somebody, if getting a card is really a sign of how much you love me and you take time to pick it out, and you might want to start off at the beginning, asking the person, hey, how do you like cards? You know, now I'm being very, very simple in that analogy, but if you getting a card is real important and that person doesn't think anything about giving a card, then you're gonna be sitting there mad, you know, he's like, you're so unthoughtful. And you open the door for the enemy when somebody you meet at work gives you a card. And then all of a sudden you say, man, he's just so thoughtful. Oh my God, I wish I could get this at home, you know, and the brother never gave you a card, you know, the sister never gave you a card. Like, it's nothing new, right? So talk about knowing yourself well enough to know how you give love. Chris, let's start with you.
Sure. I think that's a great question, Pastor Cofield. You know, one of the great things about those, you know, self-discovery tools like the love languages is that it helps people pinpoint precisely, you know, what their love language is, what their sweet spot is, how they interpret love. Because quite honestly, very few of us, if any of us, really understand that without, you know, some guidance and some instruction. And so for me, tools like the love languages have helped. Understanding myself through things like personality assessments have helped. But I think what has helped more than anything is really understanding what are the components of a healthy relationship. You know, we talk about things such as respect, but when you look at the respect wheel, you have things such as accountability, trust, safety, cooperation, support, honesty. All of these things have varying connectors to them, ways that we should express these things to people who we say we love. So, for example, if I come into a relationship and I say, hey, I need accountability in my relationship. Well, that starts with me first, right? I need to admit when I make a mistake, or I need to admit when I'm wrong. I need to accept responsibility for my behaviors, my attitude, you know, and so that's me modeling accountability so that, hey, I'm not coming in saying, hey, give me, give me, give me. I'm literally setting a bar of expectation, you know, for my spouse or my partner to join with me in as we go along this journey to try to build this healthy relationship. I think another thing that's really important that we don't really talk about a lot and that's needed is cooperation. You know, asking your spouse to do things, but not accepting, you know, accepting change, making decisions together, you know, win-win resolutions in conflict. All of these things are important in cooperation because, you know, we want to make sure that we can go along to get along, right? I mean, if I'm coming home and baby is mad at me, I mean, nobody's happy in the house, right? I mean, the whole vibe of the house is off. It's uncomfortable. Now I got to try to find conversation fillers to say, you know, I'm not as gifted as an orator as you, Pastor. So I'm gonna be looking for fillers for the next 2 weeks, right? I mean, all of these things add tension to the home. And so that cooperation is so important because, hey, I want to come in. If we have conflict, guess what, baby? Let's come up with a win-win resolution so that we can put this conflict behind us and move forward. 15 years ago, it'd have been an argument. I would have had to win the argument. Now I understand I can win the argument and still lose respect. And I don't want to lose respect with you, baby. I want us to move forward so we can have a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I think you're raising a great point. And I use this analogy, when you're getting on the highway and, one sign says yield, people think yield means press your gas pedal as hard as you can and squeeze in when you're getting on the highway. And yield actually means, if there's a vehicle coming, stop.
Yes.
Until you can get on. Now, if you are on the freeway already and you see a person that's coming on the on-ramp and they're not yielding, you can continue down that path and it will result in a crash. And when the police officer comes out, the police officer will deem that you were in the right of way, right? That the person coming on should have yielded to you. You are in the right, but you just had a wreck. You just had a wreck. And I think sometimes in relationships, we're so committed to being right that we want to be right even when it causes a wreck.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen, man, when I see somebody just barreling on the freeway, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the right of way. But guess what? I'll give up being right just so we won't get in an accident.
And you know what, Pastor, you just bringing up another point, because it just goes back to that, that biblical model of relationships that you always talk about, modeling the type of behavior and the type of responses that I want people to interact with me, right? So like you say, understanding that, yeah, I could win the argument, but it's just going to be a complete wreck. And that's taking time for me specifically, right? Because I enjoy talking through challenges, right? But everybody doesn't like doing that.
Right. And sometimes, you have to give up. My wife and I will say, hey, I'd rather be happy than be right. Right. Because sometimes I can be right and be in an accident. And, you standing there holding the steering wheel in your hand, and you like, well, I had the right of way, and it's like, okay, you might have lost your life, trying to prove that you're right. For those of you who are interested, and I know somebody's already asked the question, the 5 love languages, and these are not in any order of significance: quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, the giving of gifts, and acts of service. So in other words, when you think about how you give love, okay, what is your natural bent? And typically we will have a primary and secondary love language. And then we also have how we receive love. And again, I want to tell you, sometimes how you receive it is not how you give it. So for example, giving of gifts is one of my love languages, is how I express love. Okay. Mm-hmm. So now if my wife, for her, gifts was no big deal, she just, goes out and buys whatever she wants. And when I give her something, it's like, oh, okay, thanks. I may make the mistake of feeling like she's rejecting my love. When now I also have to understand not only how I naturally give love, but I'm mature enough now to look at her and say, okay, how do you receive love? And if this is how you receive love, I want to make sure that I love you. So I'm going to give you love the way I know you receive it, because I don't want there to be any question in your mind that I love you. But I have to have enough knowledge of who I am and enough knowledge of who my spouse is to be able to make sure, and the willingness to compromise, because I don't want to just say, you know what, that's just the way, I show love. I can remember, this is going to be before LaTwanice's time, but Chris, you probably remember this. There were a lot of mothers who had to interpret for their children whether or not their fathers loved them.
Yes.
And come behind their father and say, your dad really loves you, and you'd be like, really? Like, I just got my behind whipped. What you mean he loves me? And in your father's mind, he probably did more than his father did for him. He put a roof over your head. There was food on the table. So he is providing for you. And that was the measurement of love. There was no expectations for a generation of men to be emotionally intelligent, right? I mean, you know, there was a whole generation of men that we never saw cry. Like that was not what
Yeah.
they did. And now we have men who are more in tune and in touch with their feelings. But once again, for those of you who may be grabbing a pencil, the 5 love languages: quality time, number 1. Number 2, words of physical touch. I said number 2 was physical touch. Number 3, words of affirmation. Number 4, the giving and or receiving of gifts. And number 5, acts of service. And this would be a great exercise for those of you who may be in a relationship to see if you can guess how you give love, identify how you give love, see if you can guess how your significant other receives love, and see how you receive love. It would be interesting to see how close you are. And I think as you go forward in your relationship, the one thing that I don't think anybody wants is to just tolerate being in a relationship. And LaTwanice, I want you to speak to that, because that was something that you said in our meeting that I thought was really strong. You were like, nah, we're not gonna settle. I mean, we just, you know, we rather be by ourselves. We're not gonna settle.
Yeah. So the research says that women, millennial women at that, are taking their time with getting married because they are, you know, on the track of their career or obtaining college degrees and more education. But those women, those men that take their time with choosing a mate and getting more education, they actually have a more stable relationship because they've taken that time in and out to get to know themselves, but also to, you know, reach whatever goals or travel the world that they may have had prior to getting a relationship or a marriage. But one of the things that, you know, growing up, my mom was a single parent. So she had to be mom and dad. So you're talking about, you know, your mom coming in and saying, oh, your dad loves you. My mom would, you know, render discipline. And then she would come back later and say, well, you know, I love you. And I do love you. Don't be mad at me. You know, I love you more than, you know, than this hurts. So, you know, growing up and recognizing my history and my family of, you know, this is single women, single mothers raising kids by themselves or having little to no help from the fathers, my outlook was, okay, I definitely want to get married before I have children. And I want to make sure that my marriage is healthy, as what Chris was talking about. It's a healthy bond. We love the Lord. That's number 1. But we have a healthy amount of communication, compromise, where it doesn't feel like one person sacrificing more than the other. So as we were growing up, even as as my mother was a single parent, I got to watch other people's parents in their relationships and their marriages. And I was like, I don't want to be in a relationship when I don't have to. You don't have to be in a relationship. You don't have to tolerate disrespect. You don't have to tolerate someone cheating on you. You don't have to tolerate someone that can't give you your love languages at all. I actually met somebody, and this was like simpatico as soon as we met. And he had checked off everything off my love languages list. The only thing that he did not have was physical touch because he was in another state. So he had everything else, but he was in another state. So that I didn't realize how much I was putting myself to the side or putting my emotions and my feelings to the side because I wanted it to work, not knowing I was doing myself a disservice because I wanted it to work so much, but not having him here or me being there was detrimental to my mental and emotional health. And so I did not want to, but I had to break it off because I was like, this is not what I want. I thought about it in the future and I was like, if I had a child, I'll be raising this child by myself, basically. I'll be in the living room by myself, basically. So it's like that fear of, if I'm going to go into this, I want to know that somebody is there, that security that we're looking for as millennial women and men, because men are looking for this in women as well. They don't want to just, marry any woman, any type of woman. They want to make sure, hey, she sees me, I see her, I understand him, I understand her, and we are going to work this out. We're not going to give up on each other.
Yeah.
So cohabitation is a thing. 7.5 million people, unmarried couples, are living together, compared to 1960, where it was only like 450,000 people. So now we're doing something that's comfortable, right? There's no commitment there. So what are we doing? We're just living together, or as the old folks would say, shacking up.
Yeah.
Because I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I can leave whenever I want.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think what's interesting with the stat that you just gave is part of that, I think, growth in the number of people who are living together is because of that fear of not marriage, but the fear that the marriage won't work.
Yeah.
Right. And so now, man, I'm going to go down this path of divorce. I have seen, if not experienced, the emotional turmoil and terror of going through that failed marriage. And it is a challenge beyond measure. And people want to avoid that as much as possible. I think the other thing that's interesting that you made that statement is, the truth of the matter is, a bad relationship is a bad relationship, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you're married or not. So let me just say to anyone who's listening, who is cohabitating with somebody, man, it doesn't work when you're married. It's probably not going to work when you're living together either. I mean, it is what it is. And you want to make sure that you are at an emotionally healthy place. And let me just throw this in as well as a side note for those who are listening. I've had people say, being married is just a piece of paper, right? And no, that's not true. It's more than a piece of paper. And everybody that you have talked to who has lived together, when they get married, the relationship changes. And it especially changes for the woman. It changes. There's a level of not just ability exercise, but there's authority exercise. And, I often tell people, hey, if he's got to get a license to fish and he's got to get a license for a dog, he ought to have to get a license to live with you. That should be the minimum standard that you require, because it's a level of respect that you want and a level of commitment. It's going to change. There's no question. But don't think, okay, it's unhealthy. It's going to show up when we get married, but it's going to be okay when we just live together. Because you really can't have a good relationship when you got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Chris.
And Dr. Cofield, I love what you said. A lot of what you're talking about, that fear, that phobia of commitment, that fear of flying, is really rooted in what I believe to be is really people just trying to protect themselves the best way they can. Being a divorcee myself, it's been a challenge to really be vulnerable and to really open up past a certain level, because quite honestly, until that person moves past that fear of rejection, he, she, or they is going to always believe that someone is out to get them, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so, for my particular journey, what I had to do was realize that everyone wasn't out to get me. I had to realize that what happened in a previous relationship, which, by the way, I would like to say to all brothers, accountability starts with a man. And so even if you were just at fault for 2% of the issues, take 100% of your 2%. And so for me, the genesis of my healing began when I accepted accountability. And I said, you know what, man, I wasn't exercising that authority in my home, right? Just because you pay bills doesn't mean you're exercising authority. You just exercising a wallet. And so, just because we have a physical relationship doesn't mean I'm exercising authority. I'm just, I'm just satisfying a legitimate desire that may be there. And so we have to redefine as men what manhood really is and truly is, and understand, as I came to grips with some things a few years ago, I used to think that, I was attracted to a certain type of sophisticated woman, a type of woman who was intellectually stimulated, and all those things are true. But what I really had to find out is that, man, I really just like companionship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really just want somebody down to earth. I don't have to have Tracy Ellis Ross. Yeah. Now, I'm not turning down Tracy Ellis Ross if you're listening.
Or Idris Elba.
Right. Lots of these is
but he's already taken.
Shout out to Idra, right? Not turning down any of that, but I don't have to have that expression to be fulfilled, right? But part of this, Pastor, is part of our society's infatuation with youth culture, right? So having that Peter Pan mentality when it comes to relationships, I'm never going to really grow up. I'm just going to keep doing the youthful thing. I don't really want to deal with the substantive issues. All of us have dealt with that. I've dealt with it. I still deal with it to a certain extent. But somewhere in the scriptures, it says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, but as I became a man, I put away childish things. And so the question then becomes, are we willing to put away childish things?
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, it really comes down to really redefining some things. I was thinking as you were talking, we have misdefined sex as intimacy, and so many men have defined themselves not by their intellectual thought process above the neck, but their prowess below the waist, and have failed to realize that just because, you can have sex doesn't mean you're practicing intimacy, right. And what that means in terms of opening up. We got to get ready to go, man. I really have appreciated this talk with LaTwanice Walker and Minister Chris Johnson. As we get ready to close out, Lala, give us some final thoughts, some things that you'd like to share with some people who are listening, who may be behind you on the journey, or may be in a situation where they're not necessarily exercising all of their emotional intelligence, and how they need to really trust themselves in that process.
Yeah. One, I would say, as millennials, we pride ourselves on actively pursuing the life we want rather than, accepting the hand that we've been dealt. So one of the things that I had to do, and I talk about this amongst my friends as well, my close friends, is that we have to face the music. This is our reality, the fantasy that we have built, as being a child, going into adulthood and wanting to reach that goal, that desire that we have of finding our mate and just being complete. We have to be whole before we can try to be whole with someone else. And that's like main thing for me as well. I recently got a book called The 4 Agreements by Don Ruiz, and it has 4 main key points in there that you guys should definitely look at. One of the points in there that helped me was don't take things personally. So if someone is telling me that I'm not giving them the proper love that they need, it is my job as an emotionally intelligent woman or man to make sure I hear them out, that I'm mature enough to hear what they have to say, their delivery and their tone, and really understand where they're coming from. You guys were talking about it, and I was just like, but what if the person, you can tell someone that they didn't, you don't love me properly, and you can give all the examples, but what if that person doesn't receive that? They don't understand what you mean. You given them examples, but to them, they're like, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't put the toilet seat down. Okay. That's not a big deal.
Right.
I didn't offer to bring you lunch. That's not a big deal. So I think it's while we are growing and learning about ourselves, we also need to be a little bit more open-minded about others are in their journey, and we have to be give some kindness, give them some gentleness there. So I would say look into reading Don Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. It's helpful.
Great. Chris, how you want to close out today?
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Cofield, thank you for having us on. I just want to be I want to be a point of encouragement for someone who may have given up on the idea of love or the notion of love as expressed through relationships and marriage. I just want to say to whoever is listening, don't give up on your capacity and your ability to love. It's there. It's like a muscle. It must be developed. It has to be exercised. I'd like to suggest also a reading for your listeners, Dr. Cofield. If you get a chance, please look for a book called The Book of Romance by Tommy Nelson. The Book of Romance by Tommy Nelson. And what it does is it uses the Songs of Solomon as an outline for dating and courtship. And that book has actually helped me. It's really, really helped me, have a point of reference and a model, a biblical model, a model that is larger than myself to try to help guide me. Now, we'll all get outside of those lines sometimes, but, as long as we have a compass, God can deal with our moral failures. He can't deal with a compass failure. And so Song of Solomon helps us as a compass as we want to build loving, nurturing, godly relationships.
Well, let me take this opportunity to thank both of you for being with me on today and being vulnerable and transparent in sharing what your experiences have been, mistakes that you've made, and places where you've recognized your own need to grow. Thank you both for being with us. The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. And I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And the fight for your emotional intelligence, I've got to tell you, you've got to be willing to put some work in. And the reason is because it's not an easy process. It's really not. It's challenging to look in the mirror and to say, you know what, you were wrong. It's so easy for us to look at other people and blame other people. It's easy for us to judge ourselves by our intentions and judge other people by their actions. But at the end of the day, the person that you are most responsible for is you. And so I want to encourage everybody, whether you are in a relationship or not with somebody else, you are in a relationship with yourself, and work hard to become the best version of you possible. Don't come to the table with half, looking for another half and thinking the two halves are going to become a whole. You've got to literally say, you know what? I'm going to be whole when I come to the table, and whole is going to recognize whole. Just like game recognizes game, whole is going to recognize whole. And whole doesn't want half, because now we're not coming to the table equally yoked. This is Dr.D.Z.Cofield for Real World Real Talk, signing off on KTSU 90.9 The Choice and KTSUradio.com, the Real World Real Talk podcast network. Get ready for Truth with V. Michael McKay, David Goldstein, Asia, in the best of gospel music and conversation to not only feed your mind, but to feed your soul. Until next time, God bless is my prayer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info at rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.